what you want to really know is product market fit when it comes to a lot of the young companies, for example. And to be able to find product market fit, if you are able to attract inbound demand that is coming out of our marketplace in a fashion where your product is speaking to a potential buyer without you speaking to them directly, I mean, that's a sign of great product market fit in our industry.
Welcome back to the SmallSat Revolution podcast, powered by GomSpace. I'm your host, Frank Felker. I'm joined today by Narayan Prasad. Narayan is the Chief Operating Officer of SatSearch, the global marketplace for space. I appreciate you being here very much, and I have to tell you, I love that tagline. It's so simple, and it even rhymes. The global marketplace for space. Who on your team gets credit for coming up with that one?
Oh, that goes to my co-founder Karthik. I think that's the first thing that we probably came up with.
I love it. I just, whatever. It's great. It's a great communication tool. Okay, well, right out of the gate, let's find out what is the global marketplace for space? What is SatSearch?
Right, I know this goes back to about 8 years ago when there was a hackathon in Bremen in Germany, where a team of young people were given an opportunity to basically come up with something within 48 hours that could influence the industry. And so we basically went ahead and built a search engine. And the idea was that out of all the things that exist in the space industry, there's nothing that tells people in one place the entire capabilities that the industry has across the entire supply chain, including every part of the world, and of every supplier and every region and every kind of component, service, infrastructure. All of these is really not consolidated in any platform. So the idea really was to come up with a tool that helps engineers to use one resource, a wiki, a Google or Amazon, an idea that combines all of these things to then have engineers save tons of time instead of looking up stuff on Google or sending emails to random people getting wanting to get information back. So it just came about that, and then we built the idea up for the last 8 years, and here we are.
It's really interesting because it literally is a marketplace where you bring buyers and sellers together, or they find each other through your marketplace. So let's talk a little bit about the buyers and sellers. What does a typical buyer look like? What's their profile? Someone who comes to SatSearch, what do they look like and what are they looking for?
Right. I mean, off the bat, I think the most interesting things that a buyer is really looking for is quick information that can help them consolidate different sources at the same time. For example, right, if I am looking for a star tracker in the industry and I have a certain pointing accuracy in mind, certain power, mass requirements, and so on, there's no single tool in this industry that has the ability to give you all of these results in one go, so that you don't not only get the technical parameters out, but also get information like pricing or availability of the product and their lead times and heritage and all of these things in one place, right? So I think from a buyer's perspective, it's about, if I'm an established organization that has already done this survey very well before, and I have an internal supply chain division that maintains all of this in one place, it's an easy thing for me to then query. But if I am a new organization in a new country that is building up a new mission, or I'm a new startup company in a new country that has just raised funding, and I don't have a prior supply chain knowledge built up in my own small company, then you have to build it up for the first time, and you are looking to establish all of this information so that you can then make an educated procurement decision at the end for the best price to performance, or the best lead time, or the best reliability, based on whatever your choices are. But then this process becomes messy because you have to go through 20 different hoops to get the right people to give you all the information from 20 different suppliers, for example. And for us, we're just making that part of the buyer's life easy by bringing it all in one place, so that we reverse that process where basically a buyer comes to us and then we go to 20 different suppliers, and then the buyer gets all the information in one go, instead of the buyer spending 4 months getting all the information in one place. They spend less than 4 days, for example.
That's great. You made that very clear. But one thing I want to make sure I'm clear on are the people on the buyer side who are visiting SatSearch. primarily engineers who are working on a launch mission. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we do have obviously all kinds of people. That includes, students, academics, people who are in the startup world, people from NASA, Boeing, Lockheed, large companies. So we have a very healthy mix of people that is both from a geography standpoint as well as from an institution standpoint. So it's really about then how we carry the buyer journey inside our system. So obviously, what we do is really look at how serious certain buyers are in getting the information that they want, and then looking at how best we can support them in the process. So also because we need to ensure that even the supplier who is then willing to provide that information has a smooth journey while using our system, so that there's both kind of smooth oil available for both the buyer and the supplier to then coordinate between each other.
I see. And so you do a little bit of qualifying of the buyers, in other words, as well. So you're not going to just let some high school kid who decides he wants to build a giant rocket in his mom's backyard go on to SatSearch and start putting out tenders to your suppliers.
Exactly. I mean, the idea really is, I think there should be user experience that is positive both on the buyer side and on the seller side. Obviously, there's this becomes more complex in our industry because it's a business to business industry, unlike an e-commerce platform like Amazon or so on, because at the end, there is no such buyer validation. Either you press a button and buy something on Amazon or you don't. Obviously, we can't do that in our industry. So what we try to do is really looking at how we can save time both on the buyer and the supplier side. And there are obviously measures that we take on the supplier side to make the supplier experience also equally good. That ensures, that there's a decent quality of the buyer requests that we're then passing on to them and so on. So it's both. We need to kind of have kind of a very thin line where the user experience sticks. But at the same time, we do also want to encourage students and other researchers and even high school students to use our platform, because someday they will come into our industry, and so we also try to support them by giving them information as best as we can.
That's pretty smart, because the young people coming up who have an interest in space and are getting educated and perhaps in an aerospace department at a university, those are your future customers. So how many people do you have registered on the buyer side right now?
So right now, I think we have about 25,000 monthly active users in about 120 countries or so. When you look at the demography of users that we have, I think it's really representative of the industry in itself, because obviously, the industry is split with the US leading the market, being the biggest buyer and the biggest seller in the industry to a large extent. So about 30 to 35% of our users come from the US. And then we have about 25 to 30% of our users come from Europe. So from all over different parts of the European Union, led by Germany, Netherlands, and France and Italy and so on. So that represents one other big region. And then the others are all split between emerging countries like India, Australia, South Korea, Japan, Israel, and so on. So we have a long tail of small countries that are also using us. We have really small programs. So like, for example, Vietnam or Indonesia or Thailand or so on, Argentina and so on. So it's really a very diverse group, but obviously bulk of our users come from the regions that spend a lot of money in space and can also work in English, which is mostly Europe and US.
And your service is free on the buyer side, isn't that correct? No charge.
Correct. So I mean, at the end, we are. That's how you generate demand and you really capture users in that sense. So, like any other traditional marketplace, unless, I mean, there could be a version of the platform that we can build which has premium features, faster response from our suppliers or higher quality of information from the buyer side, or so on. So these are all some of the things that we can look at building. So maybe that comes at a later stage, but at
That's an
least for now,
interesting idea.
we look at it. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk now about the suppliers that come to your site. This is, for them, it's a subscription service. I'm not going to ask you about the pricing levels or anything like that, but obviously very valuable opportunity for them to attract qualified buyers and vet through them. Um, what what sort of response? And again, I don't want to ask you to name a particular company, but can you give me sort of a case study, a success story of a company that attracts a good share of inquiries? Obviously, once the inquiry is made, you can't be responsible for the deal getting closed. But can you give me an idea what a new supplier might expect to happen once they came on your platform?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, I love the story from one of the suppliers that we worked with from a couple of developing countries that I can give you an example from. I think one is from India and the other is from Ecuador. As you can imagine, these are extremely difficult geographies to be able to build a space business out of because the markets that are local, even a country like South Africa, it's very similar, where the internal market is quite small. For example, when you look at a country like Ecuador or South Africa, and I mean, we've been very helpful to some of these suppliers by enabling them to tap into the demand that is coming out of our platform. So traditionally, if you can imagine trying to develop business from a place like South Africa or Ecuador, and if you have to do that by physically being present in the US or Europe continuously over the entire year and trying to get people to buy your products, that's going to be really expensive for these companies, right? So I think these companies do have very competitive products at competitive pricing, but then for them to reach out to the relevant people at the relevant time is going to be extremely challenging. I think one of the major hallmarks of our platform has been trying to help such companies find demand and get access to that demand. And then once they see that access, they are able to prove to these buyers that they have a reliable product at a great pricing, for example, with great performance. So they've been able to reduce the amount of money they would actually spend on acquiring that business at the end. And that's a great outcome, and that's the outcome that we look for a lot of the suppliers. And that's what business is about, right? You're trying to always reduce the cost of acquisition of your customer.
Well, and that is where the rubber meets the road, we would say. So these companies that you're talking about in emerging markets, have they not only been able to attract tenders, but have they been able to attract money?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a question of also for many companies, even not just established companies or even the small companies, right? Even for the startups, for example, uh, what you want to really know is product market fit when it comes to a lot of the young companies, for example. And to be able to find product market fit, if you are able to attract inbound demand that is coming out of our marketplace in a fashion where your product is speaking to a potential buyer without you speaking to them directly, I mean, that's a sign of great product market fit in our industry, for example, or in any industry. So I think what we see ourselves for a lot of the companies, small, medium, big, is really a question of, do you have commercial demand, for example, that is attracting, or we simply act as a mirror to the demand that they have for their products in the current landscape of procurement? So I think companies who have great product market fit will obviously attract great interest from buyers. But obviously, I think if companies are not attracting that kind of demand that is coming through from our marketplace, it's a question of, is this the timing really interesting now, or is it a future time in which this product may be interesting for the market, or is it that you have to make some changes with your product or so on. So there's some level of feedback mechanism that we can then build in.
Well, I can see where that would be very valuable to suppliers of any size for a prospective buyer to say, I really like your offering in this area, but I really wish it would also do this, or that it didn't do that. And none of us can know what's in the mind of our client unless they tell us. So I really like that. Now, how do buyers find SatSearch in the first place?
Right. I mean, we don't pay for any of our own marketing to a large extent. I think today we have often, I think, over 40% of returning users to our site, which means that, it's a sign of people coming back to us and using us to search a lot of the things. I think, what we really executed well on is really creating a SEO strategy that is very effective for ourselves, and also providing effective service to buyers that are using us on a daily basis, so that they really have the possibility of sharing their experience by word of mouth. So a few years ago, when I was wearing the SatSearch T-shirt and going around in conferences, maybe people didn't know what we were doing. But nowadays they knew me as me, which is Narayan, but not as SatSearch. But I think today, when I go to a lot of conferences, people see my T-shirt and say, "You're SatSearch," and then they'll ask me who you are as a person. So I think that switch has occurred.
That's what we call branding. Good for you. Didn't know who you were. Now I know when I see the word SatSearch on your T-shirt what that means. That's great. Congratulations. But it takes a little while to make that happen, doesn't it? So
Oh yeah.
you also provide, if I'm right, and please correct me if I'm incorrect, a certain level of analytics for suppliers about how many, if you will, hits or visits their listings are getting, what are the most popular listings, where they're coming from. Could you speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the problem in our industry, I think, generally is that there's not a lot of you know data that is driving a lot of the decision making around marketing in generally. I think people in our industry have mostly stuck to spending money at events and having just stands and so on. So, I mean, that's a great way of having to meet existing customers and even discover new customers. But given that there is one conference every week in our industry now, there's not a lot of data and a lot of spending that you have to be in every event to a large extent. So what we're really looking at is exposing a certain level of analytics for suppliers for their own products to look at how well those products are captured in buyer sentiment or in buyer demand. Obviously, they may get that from their own website and so on, but then we give an additional signal at the end, which may confirm their existing signal that comes from their own website as such. So obviously, if a company has 30 different products and there's one product that does 20 times better than the other one, for example. So obviously that product the company may want to double down on that product and invest more into R&D and create a new strategy to maybe create an offshoot product out of that, for example. So there's a lot of insight for new product development, marketing strategy, sales strategy, R&D investment, board level meetings. Their decision can happen based on analytics that can happen. So we've seen that happen with multiple of our existing customers, that these things can really create some internal hypotheses for their product leadership team, sales team, marketing teams, boards, and so on. So this is just something that we want to introduce to the industry, so that there's more and more data that is driving decisions for across the board.
Great. That's really great stuff. Now, at some point in our discussions, you had mentioned something to me, and I'm not sure I had this correct again, but about some level of integration between SatSearch's database and NASA. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So NASA's put in a lot of effort through its Small Satellite Virtual Institute that is, I think, based in Ames, to have a consolidated search engine of their own, which is the S3VI database that they have. And obviously, they publish a lot of the conference proceedings, radiation-related data, parts-related data, and everything that is available across the industry, essentially in their site. And we've had the opportunity to work with them to basically integrate our library into their tooling. So which means that really that they don't need to really maintain a log of products and update them on a regular basis, or leave it to the supplier to do that. So the benefit obviously that they have is that they get to use or query our database and get the latest product information served to the engineers that are using their platform. And obviously the benefit that we get is that whoever is using their site is able to discover us in turn and the suppliers that are represented on our platform, and are able to then find potential solutions that are out there.
That's a very strong connection that you have there. Well, Narayan, we're almost out of time, but there's a question I always like to ask my guests before we sign off, which is there some thought that's come to mind or a question I have not asked you that you'd like to share before we sign off?
Absolutely. I think one of the more interesting things to look at is what is the future of the space industry supply chain? Why there's very little conversations that happen around this. There's a lot of people who are looking at vertically integrating, for example, like SpaceX or Amazon or so on. Obviously, not every company has the leverage, or every organization or every country has the leverage to do that. You need a lot of money to be able to do that. So, like every other industry, at some point of time, like the auto industry and so on, the space industry will have a globalized supply chain if it needs to be an industry that goes towards low cost and higher access, higher performance, and so on. And people will look for value wherever it exists and globalize their supply chains to be able to meet lower costs at higher performance. So I think the future is something that we should all be excited about and look at what that would mean. Obviously, there's a technology part of the future where people are building reusable rockets and satellites that are manufacturing stuff in space and so on. There's a lot of things about technology, but what we're really excited about is applying economics to the space industry using a marketplace. That's something that not many people talk about because it's just boring as it is, but it's related to economics. But it's another way of really driving costs down at the end.
Yeah, economics generally, just say that word and people's eyes glaze over. So I know how that is. That was my course of study in university. Well, Narayan Prasad, Chief Operating Officer of SatSearch, I always learn a lot every time we speak. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Frank. And I look forward to meeting you in person at some point in time.
Thanks again to Narayan, and thank you for joining us. Until next time, I'm Frank Felker saying I'll see you in orbit. The SmallSat Revolution podcast is powered by GomSpace. With platforms, components, systems, and services to meet every SmallSat requirement, GomSpace brings their innovative technologies and a flight heritage of over 2,000 successful deployments to your next mission. GomSpace, leading the SmallSat revolution. Learn more at gomspace.com.